Thank you, Lori. Screening is actually an older project. I mean, I'd love for people to check it out, but it's a little past. Now we've moved on a little bit from that one. Thank you so much, Lori and Sarah in Philadelphia Photo Arts Center. I'm Nadia Hironaka, and it's an honor to be able to introduce Julianna Foster, who is a longtime friend and just so happens to be a wonderfully creative and talented artist, and whose work I very much enjoy. Before I kind of move into my presentation, I want to apologize for background, not so interesting. So I decided to do instead a foreground, okay? So instead I have a foreground. Also when I kind of, the focus is off of me and just sort of looking at the images, this will help kind of, I think, distract a little bit. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen with everybody, make sure my sound's on. Okay. All right, so for today I have a title actually for today's introduction, which is actually kind of funny because titles are something I actually have a very hard time coming up with when it is my own artwork, but ask me to do an introduction for a talk and voila, I create a title. So today's title is Unpredictable Encounters and Shifting Assemblages, or a few thoughts about landscape, interaction, manipulation, and anti-progress. All right, let's move on here. Okay, so rest here for a moment, because I do have a disclaimer. Forgive me, I'm going to read my introduction. I do have some images for your eyes and a little bit of sound and a little bit of movement, and I'm going to try my best to prevent my voice from entering into a total drone zone. All right, so let's acknowledge this terrain and explore. I'd like to approach a series of topics which for me bring up questions when viewing this body of work, Geographical Lore. I love questions, they open things up. And so much of the success of this work rests in these pathways, which are approachable, engaging, and yet delightfully complex. So I said there'd be a little bit of sound there. I am left contemplating spaces full of freeform horizons, abstract vistas, and surreal landscapes. And while the specific locations from Julianna Foster's Geographical Lore series are not ones that I have personally visited, familiar aspects do surface, and I reflect on the destinations that I have come to know through my own travels over the years. These recollections have, however, been infiltrated with other images that filter in from various films, photo books, news media, and more, all of which by this point have planted themselves deep inside my head, commingling with my own personal memories. What surfaces is a mix of fact, lived experiences, and of course, fiction. In addition, I must remind myself to consider time, the moment in which I, the viewer, am seeing this landscape. Without any excuses, I will place an added note of importance onto that moment, or this moment, when I am looking, experiencing a singular instance out in nature, or experiencing a singular instance with art. But this moment, this singular important moment is biased by me. Which moment in time takes precedence? Is the mountaintop of today the right one, or was it at its peak 10 years ago, 100? Perhaps 1,000, likely even earlier. Clearly change has happened. What I see is both the presence and the absence of what has come before. Geographical changes amassed throughout the years have both built up and wiped out. Noted is the wear and tear of the environment, as sand, sun, wind, and rain mark themselves visibly upon the surface. And within Earth's even more recent history, changes caused by human interaction have been seen and felt by most, if not all, living on the planet. The leveling of mountains, the removal of forests, gouges dug deep in the ground, deserts made lush with supplementary water, and wetlands drained, left to run dry, have marked these spaces. But there is that need, an almost naive curiousness perhaps even a little indulgent, or maybe just an honest impulse to see ourselves, to hear ourselves as we call out hello or echo at the mountain's peak, the cave's interior, or the river's edge. We consider, then choose, how to best document this moment. Selfies aside, for some, these gestures must remain within the space, stone cairns along ridges and paths, while others create an imprint, a fossil, to leave evidence of an experience physically present. But the spaces themselves can also become a barrier, their material worth and preciousness calling into question the need for any additional physical markings. These environments can also be confusing. They can surprise us, almost overtake us. I'm not sure how this collaborative survival works, but I'll gladly play along. It is through the printed image that Foster offers evidence, both the experience from the natural environment and the particular manipulations she has cast upon them, creating something that almost seems summoned, not quite of this world. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget how powerful the printed image can be. For this example, I fall back to fiction, Ridley Scott's 1982 cinematic dystopian Blade Runner. We witness known and unknown replicants, Leon and Rachel. I say known as Leon is aware of his laboratory origin story, while Rachel is not. Regardless of this awareness or lack thereof, both place considerable value in their personal photographic images. For them, their photographs provide the evidence of their being, their existence. There's manipulation here, a lot. Some even flecked with gold. In this digital age and extreme consumer culture, there's evidence of the process, a slower, more considered, hands-on approach, a nostalgic nod which highlights the steps involved, not just the outcome or the end product. Let's look around, not just forward. There's some kind of alchemy at play in Foster's studio. Mountaintops and dirt roads are reworked to become texture and patterns. Slivers of bright red seep out of cracks and fissures, defining paths are constructed which tend to lead us back, spiraling in. There's doubling, and where there's doubling, there's trouble. I know what happens, and only one makes it out alive. We're invited in to see the evidence and then sit with it. There's no end resolve, no definitive answer, no mound of gold. Or maybe. The process, the act of creation wins out in the end. A material object is created, evidence exists, sprinkled with notions that stand outside of time, that look within, purely for the sake of looking, regardless of progress or the move forward towards enlightenment, enjoying the murkiness of the void just because. And that's it. All right.
Thank you, Nadia. That was great. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, how are we doing? Can everyone see the screen? It's working? Yes. Fireworks are going off?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you to my friend and amazing artist, Nadia Hironaka, for that thoughtful and interesting intro. I really appreciate that. You know me so well, and I'm so happy that we could be here together and do this. So thank you. I also wanted to start off and share my gratitude to the Philadelphia Photo Arts Center and all the folks at PPAC, and in particular to Lori for this invitation. I greatly appreciate it. I'm a big fan of PPAC and really honored to be here. I also wanted to just extend my appreciation to all of you for attending tonight. I see so many familiar faces and names, and I feel so fortunate to share this space with y'all. So, again, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So before I present the work from my current project titled Geographical Lore that Nadia so well kind of put in context, I did want to give you a brief overview of some past projects, just a little snippet to shed some light on my creative journey, perhaps for you, and maybe for me as well. So to put the work in context, photography has always been at the heart of my practice. Over the many years, it's veered on slightly different paths, from a documentary approach to more of an exploratory alternative direction where process and material is at the forefront, experimenting with prints and artist books, multiples, which was mentioned in my bio, sequencing of images, both moving and still. And at the same time, pursuing collaborations with other artists. That's always been a really important part of my practice, and something that, and I see some of my collaborators in the Zoom room tonight. I've really valued that experience. I'm gonna, I don't know if the images, can everyone see the full images on both sides?
Yeah, the two, I can see two.
Yeah, the two, okay, excellent.
Yes.
So this is from a project, The Hills. Narrative structures and ways of storytelling has often been a constant in previous series. So constructed scenes based on some kind of existing story derived from literature or oral stories, and also recreating scenes that are found in cinema to tell another part of that story, all of which have relied on the fundamentals of narrative to examine and comment on human experience. Kirkwood, a series of photographs that depict an unexplainable phenomenon that took place in a small suburban community. These images teeter between fact and fiction, interpretation and perception, and they allow for imagined scenarios of constructed realities to represent rather than illustrate these kind of strange events that occurred. The work generated from Kirkwood is primarily based on built environments that are made by hand at the scale of a miniature house. Then they're photographed and printed to human scale, adding to the level of illusion and mystery. And the scenarios explore ideas of deconstruction within a domestic space. And this happens through flooding, fire, natural decay, and it begins to question the presence of human interaction within this particular architecture. Swell, which is another series from this thread, was work generated from a news story I read in the paper of a witness account of an event. Photographs from Swell show a fantastic event that allegedly occurred years ago in a coastal town. And sort of as the story goes, there was a nor'easter that was forming in the Atlantic Ocean from remnants of a hurricane, when several residents reported seeing something that they had never witnessed before and have never seen since. Swell operates on several levels to recount the descriptions of what happened through a series of photographs in an artist book. So the work transformed into a retelling of events as I interpret them to be, and was guided by questions like, did this actually occur? Was this simply an illusion? How do you explain the fact that several people were reported having seen such different, but albeit similar phenomenon? I couldn't get the story out of my head, and it really stayed with me for years. This is a newsprint edition that was part of the series. I developed the series through photographs that I shot directly of seascapes over years, coastal regions, and architecture that I had hand built, model scale, built environments of architecture and landscapes that were then lit, photographed, and then slightly digitally manipulated. And through this, my intention, again, was not really to illustrate in a literal sense or to dictate or record what the witness version of the experience, but instead I took liberties with the narrative account of this event and altered the outcomes. The witness account mentioned that for this particular image, it came from this account that I had read, that it was early one morning, somewhere around 6:30 a.m., and the brunt of the storm had mostly passed overnight, and the weather had calmed, but it was still raining and rather foggy. And as I read her account, I imagined myself walking on the shore like she did, staring at the sea. There was no separation between the sea and the sky. It was all one tone of gray. And then the water just suddenly began to swell, and I could see it. And this was the moment when the vision sort of formed in my head, and I started thinking about how to extend this series of images. And I began to question if it was constructed or invented, or was it something that was actually experienced. So following Swell, I started an artist's book, and I was collecting and categorizing images, and I was trying to tame the wild beast of sequencing and editing and arranging a book. And I know people in this room have done this, and I know you understand what I mean about that, taming that beast. It's like a wild cougar. It's quite a feat. And kudos to anyone here that has done it successfully. I'm still learning how to do it. I feel like I have a long way to go. But I was struggling with this artist book, and I was struggling with the story I wanted to tell with the selection of images over a short period of time. And I had a deadline nearing, and so the book moved forward when I inserted words and text, and I was writing, and it sort of entered into the mix, and it started to accompany the photographs. And this intersection was affirming. The progress of the story became a trace of a particular time that I was living as it was unfolding. And the book became Lone Hunter. And a wonderful artist collective here in Philly, Grizzly Gallery, invited me to contribute to a project and supported a small edition of the artist's book. And shortly after that, it was completed. In between, a great online journal presented a selection of grouping of images from the book. And through that online journal, I was able to incorporate a letter to the reader that accompanied the images. And I hadn't had a chance to do that before. And so that was kind of a new part of the project. Now, what we're seeing here is on the left side is the case, the front case of the book that's letterpressed. Then it has an insert that's a book with about 60 pages. And then it had a print within the book itself. So the letter to the reader, it started off like this. This letter below is meant for you. Dear reader, are you waning or waxing? You may feel as if you're traveling somewhat aimlessly in search of something, at times relying on the moon to guide your path. But our path, like that of the moon, is cyclical. Lone Hunter, this is a spread from one of the pages. Lone Hunter was a book and exhibition of prints based around a nonlinear narrative, and the work from this project, when shown independently as a book or series, represents two different narratives. And it kind of questions the chronology of time, how we navigate memory, the choices of what we decide to keep and what we let go of, and how memories can be fabricated or manufactured. These images deliberately blur time. They and then the place taking viewer and the reader on sort of a journey from day to night, over a month, through the seasons. And the moon is sort of the guide, marking the time. As mentioned before, text was a non-descriptive, poetic component. It's a thread throughout the book, almost as if an internal voice is guiding the reader on a journey. So, for example, here, this was just one little part of one of the pages. There in the vista, I can find you hunting by the light, prowling, shape-shifting, as if there was some urgency. Have we mistaken these shadows for the real thing? And then the Print Center, I exhibited the series of images at the Print Center along with the book. And that was the only time I've shown this work. And it's in the past. I've moved past it, but it was a really great moment to be able to think about narrative and challenge myself with narrative, with my own story, opposed to using a pre-existing story. So it was a really good moment for that. So I appreciate the experience with Grizzly and in the between and the Print Center for allowing me to have that time with it. So getting to geographical lore. So just to kind of, and I loved the connections that Nadia brought up with this work. It really is fitting. My first and only exhibit of this work collectively was last year around this time, actually this week. And it was the beginnings of Geographical Lore, started a few years ago when I was on a road trip in New Mexico with a dear friend and a really excellent travel companion, Mara May. And I don't know if Mara's here, but if she is, I love you, Mara. I think it was sparked by the desert air or a road trip, just open road, but the landscape grabbed hold of me. And I recognized that, this project, Geographical Lore, is a continuum that references past series and projects with a focus on themes that some of the things I've already done, constructed, invented realities, thinking about various ways of approaching narrative in linear and nonlinear ways, exploring notions of the photograph as both an image and object. And so in the title, Lore, it refers to folklore and myths that align with these invented landscapes that I'm building or creating. And storytelling remains a continuum. The history of place is part of that story. And these photographic works do consider ways in which the natural world can be represented. And at times, I completely recognize this, and I know at times it's through a very romanticized lens, a very poetic lens, and then other times it's through a critical one. More broadly, I'm centering my interest on content that relates to, forests, mountain ranges, deserts, and coastlines. Within these natural spaces, I'm drawn to sort of old world forests that maintain biodiversity, second growth forests that are regenerated after wildfires or other disturbances. And then, looking at mountain ranges, some that are in national parks and conservation areas, wildlands that exhibit how they are altered in a natural state or by other interference. So, like mountain ranges, I'm also intrigued with the desert and where natural borders or tributaries move within this terrain. And for example, this image comes from photographs of sandstone peaks and valleys and cliffs along fault zones that I photographed. This is the Aztec sandstone at Red Rock Canyon, or an interpretation of that space. And the color of the stone is due to the presence of iron oxide and hematite. So the exposure to the elements cause iron minerals to oxidize and rust. And so that line, that red line, that isn't actually an applied line that runs over through both of the images, is an arbitrary border along the thrust fault of that particular sandstone. This is an object that I'll talk about the how of how I make these images, but I'll tell you what you're looking at right here, because I do understand that sometimes it's difficult on screen to kind of see what's happening in these images. So this is a watercolor. It's printed on watercolor. It's inkjet print on watercolor, and it's cut. It's mounted on a shelf, and then the backing is aluminum that's cut on the edge, so it kind of shimmers, and that's why you have that kind of shimmering look to it on this side there. The documentation of these locations or places I've traveled are primarily California, New Mexico, Nevada, and of course along the East Coast of the US. And I'm always looking for unique, ecological features that are found in these places. The work reflects the marvel of how the natural world functions and the ever-changing diverse geography within and between these locations. So another slice of the pie is my curiosity and fascination with astrological and lunar, celestial explorations. And so the moon is often a recurring theme in a lot of the works. The phases of the moon, the surface, recontextualizing or sort of trying to recreate the surface of the moon finds its way a lot in the work. So, however, this project and content is somewhat new territory for me, definitely in the actual locations where I visit, but mostly with the subject matter and the complex happenings in the natural world. It certainly feels infinite, much like the moon. Some questions that may come up about the work is, and I've had people ask me this recently. I mean, it is a new project, so I'm sort of exploring all facets of it. But if people ask me, is this about environmental impact? Is the work a response to our climate crisis? And I would say that the work is a response of sorts, but not the sole purpose of it. It operates on, interpretation. And I know there are folks that are doing the extremely important work in regards to these issues, which I greatly respect their expertise. And I've started to research more about that. So you've seen this image that was presented earlier. This is Tidal Pool 2. And I would say that this is a piece that has takes on different forms. This is one that was installed for the exhibition, and it's printed on sill vinyl, which is adhered to a gray wall. And it's essentially 2 shots. So it's me looking, I'm in a tidal pool, the tide's gone in, I'm out in this space. So I'm kind of there for a while because I can't get back as the tide. So, I'm photographing a lot as that water is sort of accumulating and changing. And so it's one shot looking down and then looking up at the horizon. And when I brought this back to the studio, I extracted the water and the sky. So that's the void that you see. And then when I was installing the work, I cut along the salt path of the mountain and extended what would have been the sky to create an illusion of space a little bit there. And that's what you're seeing, that gray within that. So I would say that I'm not necessarily an avid traveler or adventurer. And those of you that have traveled with me, there's a few of you in here that have flown with me. You know how I feel about flying, but I do it. I try to do it when I can. Of course, this year has been an exception, but I do believe that this project is driven by wanderlust, a desire to learn and observe, and also to experience how we can exist in these unique environments, and to know how it feels and how it smells and how your body responds. How to be a participant in these vast, complicated natural spaces. And the challenge of somehow translating those senses into a physical object or image. There is an awareness of preservation in this effort. Tidal pool. On coastlines, tidal pools fascinate me. With my camera, I record high and low tides, and due to the frequently changing environment, because of the fluctuations in water temperature and salinity and oxygen content, there's an entire ecosystem that is submerged and exposed depending on the time of day. And I just think that's a remarkable thing to witness. And I think about that often in the symbolic nature of that activity. And this completely affects how I approach studio practice. That one experience that I've had witnessing and being a part of that. These works touch upon ideas of abstraction and representation and image manipulation from photos that are sort of come from marine protected areas, providing a chance to emphasize specific characteristics on how these environments function and evolve. Showing a fabricated reality that delves into spatial relationships and scale shifts and material and structure. And so this piece, Red Moon, is similar to the other piece, How I Made It. It's an iteration of that first one you had seen, which is printed on watercolor paper. And the red moon, or the red-orange moon, is a screen print. And then there's Centra, which is a PVC material that's backing that right side of that piece, and then it's on a wood shelf. My process is twofold. So first is the documentation through photography, and the second is a response or reaction to the photographs in the studio. And so the photographic documentation, I'm using both analog and digital, black and white and color, and I'm using it as a recording device, my camera, that allows me to collect images that show habits in nature, both of change and stability, and capture subjects that demonstrate this change and stability, sometimes over an extensive amount of time, and then other times in short intervals. So like coastal bays or tracings of deposits and erosion in rivers and coves. So just like the fundamental qualities of photography, I rely on time and light in my documentation, but also in my studio explorations. I tend to work with iterations and variation on a particular theme, or a visual element within a scene or location. This is an installation of the work that was shown last year. For this project, I have an archive of my own photographs and a reference library of objects and resources and some 35mm slide film, which this image is from. And that 35mm slide film comes from my father's collection of Greenland when he lived there in the 60s. So last year I got all of those 35mm slides and scanned them in. The location of these photos, which is it's the northwest coast of Greenland. And what fascinated me about it is that it's the only place on Earth where 4 active glaciers join together. And so when I'm working with this collection, since I actually haven't ever set foot on this grassy or on this icy ground, sometimes grassy, mostly icy, this is a representation of land with unfamiliar conditions. So my interaction with these images are dealt with on a different level than the way I approach working with my own images and my own photos. So I'm not necessarily reacting to the experience of place, but rather the envisioned land, the projection of an imagined site. Most of what I photograph, I ultimately only use about a quarter of it, and in the final works. And one image could be used in multiple ways. I also don't think that all photographs need or should be altered or changed. I appreciate and admire the photograph for what it holds and what it can reveal as a document. So this is a studio, a little corner of my studio. So that's the second part of my process, is studio work and considering the photograph as source material. I make assemblages. I make prints. I like to work with objects. I like to arrange them in space. I print on various surfaces, digitally, inkjet, and I also print manually. I make monoprints, screen prints, and I work with letterpress to experiment with how these different methods either complement or hinder the work. I print on watercolor paper, newsprint, backlit film, fabric, and transparencies. And with these, I cut and I fold, I layer, and sometimes I rephotograph a photo over and over and over again. And through this process, I'm observing as a new image emerges and another disappears. And that brings me back to that submerged and exposed, referencing back to that symbolic nature of the tidal pool. Here's an example of my thinking behind working with an image and object. So this particular rock, which, we all have those things that we love. And I found this rock and I just loved the rock. I love it visually, the way it felt in my hand. This particular rock has been in my reference library and has found its way in several works. On the left is a cut photograph of the rock or the landform. And on the right is a small scale sculpted form to mimic the landform in 3D. And it's casting a shadow and it's got this aluminum on it as well. By expanding my materials in an image and object, it opens up possibilities for another way to understand the subject. And it allows for a fabricated space to magnify. And in turn, becomes kind of a chain reaction in the way the work is created. So here's a handmade negative. And I say handmade negative because it's a photograph that's made with backlit film and transparencies and then rephotographed and inverted digitally and then printed on a transparency and then 11x14. And then I take it to the darkroom and I make a contact print. So it's a direct, and those of you darkroom works know, it's just a direct contact print. But I love the transparency because it has those same principles of a negative. Now I know it doesn't hold all the information and it is a very different, but it feels that way to me when I use it as a material. So it feels very connected to that analog film. One of the things that I love very much about photography. So as you can see, this is the negative of it, and then the positive, which was printed on fiber-based paper. And you can see the rock, the object that I made is in these pieces as well. So I talked about the chain reaction. The portal as a theme is part of that reaction. It can be fantastical, tapping into utopian ideas. And in some cases, commenting on or bringing attention to environments that have been compromised by intervention or by natural occurrences or phenomena. And these portals lead to interiors, and in this case, an exterior. And you see the little figure in that landscape really feels, you can feel that vastness. And that also, it was something that I worked with in the Swell series. So again, that's another continuum. And that person in that photograph is in this room, in this Zoom room, which is nice. So, but it brings attention to the space, portals that lead to interiors, exteriors. And as it surface, the surface of this feels like it's been broken through, and possibly by force. So the installation view of the portal, you'll be able to see, this is the image. This is printed on backlit film, and it's presented in a circular light box. And the photograph itself was created from an object that I made, the floral wallpaper object, that was then photographed with with an image behind it on backlit film. So there's multiple layers here to get to this point. And this lovely model is Amy Hicks, artist Amy Hicks. I don't know if Amy's here, but thank you for being a model for this lovely shot here of the installation. It's very difficult to document a light box, right? If anyone's ever tried to do that, it's a tough thing, but we did it. How are we doing? We doing okay? Lori?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I am absolutely loving this.
Oh, good. I was just to make sure I was going to check my time. Okay. So I have a few more to get through here. So this is just to kind of show you the process. This is an analog approach to this work. It comes in the form of alternative processes. I work with sun prints, and you've seen some of the examples of handmade negatives, composites, contact prints that I work in the darkroom when I can. And they're layered and rephotographed and printed. Sometimes they're combined with objects that I make, and they're set up on a sort of tabletop, and I'm creating shadows to give evidence of physical materials in space. And this is just on the right, an example. I want to show you a little video of the way sometimes I build. Now, remember this image, because you're going to see it again in a moment as a printed flat 2D. So backlit film. So this is something that's a material that I've grabbed onto, and I use it often as source material, but also as final material. So through this process of layering composite, the printed image now has become sometimes the third or fourth generation of the original, revealing itself as a new landscape or landform that mirrors some of the original images, yet begins to speak to the facade or the evented spaces instead of a descriptive image. At least that's my intention. That's what I try for. It works sometimes. Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging to get there. This is that final piece that you just saw in the backlit film. Here's the image of the light box. This was on exhibit. The original photographs was from the Greenland archive, my father's Greenland archive, which is the sort of landform that you see. And the ice form is an image of a ice that is formed, and then it's embedded with synthetic material that's photographed over time. And this is just a form that was taken to combine digitally with that. So I do work with books. I love artist books. I love photo books. I love all books. So this is just a couple examples of studio shots of work in progress, examples of artist book mock-ups, where I'm thinking through and sequencing and editing photos together. These examples show in the print the multiplicity of layering photographs and iteration of image that finds itself in these pieces. For me, research comes in many modes, but because I'm not a documentarian or environmental expert, the outcomes of this research varies. And sometimes it's about data, and other times it's about learning what the material is capable of. And so this work on fabric was produced many moons ago. I had made the image years and years ago and used it and came back to it a few years ago and printed it on fabric. And it's of ice blocks that were embedded with materials, both natural and artificial. And going back to ideas of tracing of time and light, these ice blocks were put in the sun and experienced the temperature of the day, and they melted, obviously, over time. And the embedded materials were revealed as the shape of the ice changed and the various materials began to alter and form. So I documented the progression of this event over the course of the day, and the outcome to me appeared as a lunar surface. So my choice to print on fabric centered around fragility and fluidity and the absorbent nature of the material. So on the left is the actual physical piece, and on the right is a detailed of layered pieces. So this was the first image from the series, and the first titled Geographical Lore, and it's a keystone of the project. This version of Gorge was conceived when I made the photograph in New Mexico, or excuse me, it wasn't conceived when I made the photograph in New Mexico of the Rio Grande Gorge, but it was a response to the feeling of my own equilibrium as I stood viewing this massive landform. And when I later viewed the photograph in the studio, I was immediately transfixed. I was taken back to that moment and remembered it, how it made me feel, how my body felt, and how I began to sway in front of the gorge, as I'm looking upon it. My intentions were not for the work, obviously to have that same experience, but I wanted it to feel slightly unbalanced when you looked at it. I wanted those similar qualities. And also the portal comes back into play. You're looking through into another space. The shape became a symbol of a map, casting a shadow on the valley. Map 2 also referred the map defining shape, same as the gorge. And the portal theme continues, a feeling of gazing into somewhere other than here. So one of my film cameras is a Holga. It's a 120 film plastic camera with about 2 shutter speeds and 4 focal lengths. And the Holga can produce unpredictable images due to light leaks and varying exposures. So I will also document similar places and scenes with my digital camera. And then I'll merge the two physically, the analog and the digital together, and make prints, reshoot, and slightly alter the image in digital software. This is a newsprint edition from the exhibition last year. My choice for either format of film or digital comes down to accessibility and location. Sometimes it's about formal or conceptual considerations, but I'm learning to be open to happenstance. So whatever the situation calls for, I've tried to open myself up to that, whether I'm using whatever material I'm using or if it's film or digital. The dark map shape here resembles the contour of the gorge, combined with the moon assemblage that I created in the light box that we saw earlier as I was laying. That is the image that ultimately came from that, and it's created from layered printed transparencies. I greatly appreciate the democratic multiple. It speaks to my choice of printing on newsprint. During the exhibition, these giveaways were in the gallery for guests to take one with them if they chose to do so. So wrapping up, I would like to say that, the studio atmosphere has been sort of a Kickstarter for Geographical Lore. I haven't always had a studio space, but I feel like what the studio environment provides is a space for spontaneity. There's potential in that space, slowing things down a bit, trusting in your intuition and recognizing the evolution of work or how it relates or communicates with another piece is something that is a big part of my, continued trajectory as an artist. And I hopefully, as I move forward with this project and other projects, I also have another project simultaneously that I'm working on. It's that beast of a book that I mentioned, another book that I'm working towards. But this is a project that I feel like there's more potential for, and there's more ideas that relate to it. And I've found that, the studio is just extremely valuable. And I'm grateful that I've maintained the practice right now, because I don't know what the future holds for that. So, and I'll close with this work that is in process. It hasn't been printed yet. But I'll end with it because I'm unsure about it, which I kind of like putting that out there. I use my Instagram as a place to hold myself accountable for working and to put experiments and things I'm trying, because I like that dialogue with people. I'm looking forward to future installations and exhibitions where we all can see each other and we can see the artwork in person, because it does have you do have a different experience from that. So thank you. That's my last slide.
Thank you, Juliana.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to try to find your Instagram and put it in the chat.
Okay.
While people are
It's-
talking.
Yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
Jules_Foster.
Okay.
Stop.
So there's lots of questions, but I want to read Mark Linga's comment. I love learning about this process. So good. Just wanted to put that out there because
Hey,
I'm
Mark.
working.
Mark Linga. I love it.
I'm going to get to the first one that came out early. Anita asked, is Lone Hunter in print? Is it available for purchase?
It's well, there was a 50. Was that Anita? You said hi, Anita.
Yeah.
There were 50 of them that we made, and they were for a CSA project, which was really great that Grizzly organized. And I think all 50 are spoken for at this point. Now it's a case and a book, and I do have some inserts for the book still left.
Stephen writes and asks a question. I love the extreme natural landscapes, deserts, mountains, tidal pools, moon, glaciers. And it seems that some of the man-made interventions appear to mirror your manipulations and process. Can you talk or expand more on this notion?
So the relationship between the actual spaces and the invented spaces?
Stephen, is that what you're asking for?
Oh, thanks. I'll just jump right in. Yeah, the work looks fantastic. Yeah, it's really more about, it seems like there's layers and manipulation of the work, of the process. And I guess just maybe talk more about that and how you're drawn to those landscapes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, the landscapes, I haven't always worked with landscapes. I mean, like I mentioned, it's kind of a new territory for me, but I think it comes from just the idea of wanting to be in those spaces, the desire to be in those spaces and photographing them. And then, when I'm out in those spaces, I'm not considering, I don't have a lot of forethought on what ultimately is going to happen, with the work. I think it's just more documenting, it's experiencing it. And then when it comes back to the studio, I usually am finding mirrored images, or I'm finding some sort of thread between them. And that's the thing that I sort of work with as far as my process goes. That's the thing that's most interesting to me, that there's usually something that's connected between all of them. And that's when I start to work with rephotographing or cutting and folding and manipulating. But the print is very important. The actual making of prints is a really important process for me, because that allows me then to start making other choices. And for a long time, my work lived in the digital realm, and it just stayed there. It didn't evolve. And I think it really took me to printing on different surfaces, cutting. And I know it may not seem like a radical act, but it was the first time I ripped or cut a photograph, or layered and rephotographed, it felt kind of radical and it felt good. It felt like something for myself. I know it's been done. I know a lot of artists have done it, and I do recognize that I'm not, reinventing the wheel here. But for me, it was a good move. I don't know if that answers your question, Stephen, but I'm kind of feeling like I might be talking around your question, but.
I think that's great. Heather writes, lovely. When you shoot, how many photos do you take to get the one? Are you editing as you shoot or later on?
Later on. I never edit when I shoot. So if I'm shooting on film, you don't know. That's the mystery and the brilliance of film, is that you can't judge too soon. I know exposure. I know how to work. I don't necessarily need a light meter right now, so I'm able to be a little bit more experimental when I'm in the field or out in location. And digitally, I don't look at it. I get my exposure where I need it to be, and then I let it happen, because I don't want to judge it too soon. I don't want to make rash decisions, because sometimes the overexposed images are the right ones. But I shoot a lot, and I shoot often, and I use my phone, and I use my cameras, and various cameras. And And then I look through them as an archive. I kind of collect them, they're together, and then I kind of make decisions about them. But I don't really delete things. I just don't. I keep it all. I've got about, 20,000 hard drives, and, I'm in the cloud, and, there's images everywhere, and I'm trying to figure out how to organize them. So if anyone's got any good ideas to share of how to organize them.
That's forever, right? That's the thing.
It's true.
Barbara asks, can you speak to your thoughts on scale? Some of the work speaks very much to smaller scale, like your artist books, a more intimate space, but you are dealing with landscape, which is a vast space. So do you envision this work ever to be on a larger scale, or do you actually decide on scale?
Thank you for that question. That's great. Yeah, the books tend to be more intimate because I do like that intimacy of the book. I mean, Lone Hunter, I always knew that was going to be that size because it felt right for that and the images. But yeah, the landscape, when I exhibited Geographical Lore last year, I printed on that sil vinyl, and my original thought was to that gray wall. I don't know if everybody remembers that. I wanted that to be one image. So I started that, and it was going to be the tidal pool image, which had the salt mountains, and I couldn't quite get there. I couldn't solve the problems that needed to be solved for that space, honestly. But my envision for that piece was it to be large, huge, like a mural size where you kind of walk upon it and you feel part of this invented space, where there's touches of reality, but then you kind of become disoriented with the space. So that was ultimately what I wanted to do. But I think in the future, I would like to think of it as in a larger scale. When I worked with Kirkwood, that project, it was all from miniatures. It was things that I built. It was a miniature house. And then when I printed them, ultimately they were printed at human scale. So they were much larger. So it was sort of going the opposite way, with that. And I felt like there was a certain, success in that work because of that scale shift. So I would like to print larger, work larger, but right now I'm sort of on a tabletop scenario. That's my workspace right now. And I think it's just because of where I am right now, as far as my studio and accessibility and things like that.
Steph Foster says, and let's start with what he says first. That was so cool.
Hey,
you
Steph.
mentioned that accessibility is a major factor in your work. Are there any photographic processes, technologies that have been inaccessible that you're excited to return to or experiment with as the world opens back up?
Well, I would say because I'm going back into the dark room. Like in the last 2 years, I found myself back in the dark room. I mean, I teach at the University of the Arts, and I've taught dark room for a long time. And, all my beginnings in photography was analog film, dark room. I had a dark room in my house. I was talking to someone today about, I used to wash my film in my bathroom. I made prints in in your basement, those kind of things. But I feel like I'm kind of going back in that direction a little bit because I do like the process of the dark room and the chemicals. So I think that's one place I'd like to go back to. And then to kind of get back to, I think it was Barbara's question about the scale, just to experiment with scale a little bit. So I'm starting to do these drawings on my photographs with charcoal. So I got this kind of interesting charcoal that's charred. It's a complicated story, but there is a story, and one day I'll be able to share it when I can get it straight. But it's a particular type of charcoal. It's big blocks of charcoal, and I've been using those on my photographs, and I've been posting some of those on Instagram. But that's something I want to get back into is working larger scale drawing on top of a photograph that maybe is adhered or part of an architectural space. So I think that might be something to experiment in the future.
Wow, that was amazing. Is there any last question? We have time for one more question. Anyone want to unmute yourself and add another voice to this conversation?
I have to just say, I cannot believe all these beautiful faces I see from all over the place. I can't thank you all enough. I mean, there's a lot of people I don't know, and thank you, and it's good to meet you, but I'm seeing Liz Sargent. I am seeing you there. I cannot believe this. Some North Carolina friends, UArts folks. Thank you, my UArts community. And I mean, it's just really great. I just really appreciate it very much. So anyway,
Super
Yeah.
glad to see
That wasn't the question.
No, that was great. So I just want to close, and I'm going to leave it open. So if you want to talk to people for a bit, but I just want to say thank you, Juliana and Nadia. It was a great night. Incredible. I also want to say to people who haven't been to this space before, please come back. Next week, we're featuring one of our 4 current Philadelphia photo artists in residence, Jay Simple. And the other 3 will be throughout the spring lineup. So please come back, Jay. This will be Jay, the only artist that we've had twice, and Jay is going to bring it. So please come back next week and in the future. And I'm going to say good night to everybody, and I hope to see you again. And I'm going to stop the recording, and then you guys can hang out for a bit if you'd like.
Okay.
I also want to say thank you, Juliana and Nadia, for such a lovely talk. It was so great to hear you. It's the first time I've heard you talk about your work. So it was really lovely. And thank you for your generosity of being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Nadia.
Thanks, Jules.
That's great. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Hey, Anya.